A dog sits atop a grave, rain or shine, unmoved by the passing of time. His fur glistens with dew as the sun rises, and his haunting gaze pierces through the foggy mornings. What could anchor such devotion to the cold ground? This isn't just any dog, and this isn't just any grave. What lies beneath holds a story of betrayal, sacrifice, and an enduring love that even death couldn't extinguish. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any inspiring stories I share. Blackthorn, the dog in question, had become a legend in the quiet town of Ravenwood. Over the years, whispers about the grave he protected circulated among the townsfolk. Children dared one another to approach him, their footsteps faltering as his golden eyes fixed on them with an intensity that could make even the bravest hesitate. The older residents spoke of the grave in hushed tones, warning others to leave the dog undisturbed. To them, Blackthorn wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian of something far greater. His vigil began the day Amelia Draycott, the woman buried beneath the cold earth, was laid to rest. Amelia wasn't just another resident of Ravenwood. She was its healer, a mysterious figure who had touched countless lives with her remedies and unwavering kindness. Yet, despite her goodness, her life ended in tragedy. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of foul play. But no one knew the truth. No one, except Blackthorn. Why did this dog, Blackthorn, never leave? What secrets did his silence guard? What was the shocking truth that only he seemed to know? This story begins in the forgotten town of Ravenwood, where a cemetery cloaked in perpetual mist holds the secrets of both life and death. On one particular grave, the final resting place of Amelia Draycott, a black dog's silent vigil would bring a long-buried truth to light and change the lives of everyone in the town. The tale of Amelia Draycott, a healer whose life ended under mysterious circumstances, is shrouded in layers of mystery and fear. People came to her for remedies when no doctor could help, yet her kindness was repaid with tragedy. After her death, whispers of foul play circulated, but no evidence ever surfaced. The only witness to whatever happened on that fateful night was Blackthorn, and his loyalty to her has never wavered. As you listen to this incredible story of devotion, you'll uncover not just the reasons behind Blackthorn's unyielding loyalty, but also a chain of events that shook the very foundation of Ravenwood. Prepare to be shocked, moved, and left questioning how far love and loyalty can truly go. Ravenwood Cemetery was no ordinary burial ground. It was a place of contradictions, beautiful and eerie, tranquil yet suffused with an air of unease. Situated on the edge of a forgotten town, it was surrounded by dense woods that seemed to whisper secrets when the wind passed through. The gravestones were weathered and cracked, some leaning precariously as though the earth was swallowing them whole. Mist clung to the ground year-round, curling around the tombstones like a living entity. This cemetery wasn't a place people visited willingly. The townsfolk would bury their dead quickly and leave without looking back, whispering prayers under their breath. But one grave stood out, both for its visitor and its story. Blackthorn, the enigmatic black dog, had made this cemetery his home. Amelia Draycott's grave, marked with a simple stone bearing her name and dates, sat in a secluded corner of the cemetery. It was surrounded by unkempt grass and wildflowers that grew untamed. The epitaph, worn by time, read, "Loved in life, remembered in death." Despite its humble appearance, it was this grave that drew all the attention. Blackthorn had been a young pup when he first arrived at Amelia's burial. Those who attended the somber ceremony spoke of how the dog refused to leave her side, even as the casket was lowered into the ground. That same night, as the last of the mourners departed, Blackthorn lay down on the freshly turned soil and stayed there. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and yet, he never wavered. The people of Ravenwood had mixed feelings about Blackthorn. Some saw his vigil as a touching display of loyalty, a pure and beautiful connection between a dog and his owner. Others, however, viewed it as an unsettling anomaly. Whispers of curses and hauntings spread like wildfire. Children were warned not to venture too close to the grave. Despite this, Blackthorn became a symbol in the town, though the meanings differed depending on who you asked. To the superstitious, he was a harbinger of doom. To the compassionate, he was a testament to love that transcends death. Amelia Draycott herself was a figure of intrigue. She had lived on the outskirts of town, a healer who treated everyone from infants to the elderly. Her remedies were said to be almost magical in their effectiveness, and she never asked for payment beyond what people could spare. But Amelia was also secretive, keeping to herself and rarely engaging in town gossip or gatherings. When she died under mysterious circumstances, the town was rife with speculation. Was it an accident, a tragic illness, or something more sinister? No one knew for sure, and no one was brave enough to dig too deeply, except for Blackthorn, who seemed to carry the weight of a secret he couldn't share. Years had passed since Amelia's burial, and Blackthorn's vigil had become a permanent fixture in the town's collective consciousness. People would sometimes leave offerings of food or water for him, though he rarely accepted them. His golden eyes seemed to scan the horizon, always watching, always waiting. It was as if he anticipated something, or someone. Josiah, the drifter who spent his nights scavenging in the cemetery, was one of the few who dared to approach Blackthorn regularly. "He's waiting for the truth," Josiah would say cryptically to anyone who asked. "He's waiting for justice." The cemetery, though often deserted, seemed to come alive through the presence of Blackthorn. Visitors felt a strange sense of both fear and reverence in his presence. It was as though the dog's vigil had imbued the graveyard with a purpose beyond merely housing the dead. What the townsfolk didn't know was that Blackthorn's unwavering loyalty would soon uncover a truth that would shake Ravenwood to its core. The cemetery, Amelia's grave, and the dog who refused to leave were all pieces of a puzzle, a dark, twisted story waiting to unfold. Blackthorn wasn't merely a dog mourning his owner. He was a sentinel, a living reminder of an injustice that had yet to be avenged. The fog that rolled through Ravenwood Cemetery wasn't just the natural mist of the area. It was a veil, obscuring secrets buried deep in the ground. The winds whispered more than just the sound of trees swaying. Some claimed they heard Amelia's name carried in the night air, a call to those with the courage to uncover the truth. Blackthorn's ears would perk, his gaze fixating on nothing visible, as though listening to a voice only he could hear. Blackthorn's story began years before his vigilant watch over Amelia Draycott's grave became a symbol of mystery and loyalty. As a pup, Blackthorn had been a gift, a scrappy bundle of black fur with golden eyes that seemed too wise for his young age. Amelia, known for her affinity with nature and her healing touch, had taken to the dog immediately. He was more than a pet. He was her shadow, following her to the woods as she gathered herbs and curling up beside her on cold nights. Amelia and Blackthorn shared an unspoken understanding. Her quiet, solitary life was a perfect match for the dog's watchful and calm demeanor. Villagers often remarked how Blackthorn seemed to know when someone approached before they even knocked on her door. He had a keen sense of people, greeting some with a wag of his tail and others with a low growl that sent shivers down spines. The villagers saw Blackthorn as a guardian, not just for Amelia but for the secrets she carried. She was a healer, but her remedies were more potent than anything the townsfolk had ever known. Whispers began to circulate. Was it the dog? Did he bring her the magic of the forest? Or was he simply the sentinel of something far greater? Though Amelia was respected for her healing abilities, not everyone in Ravenwood trusted her. Her reclusive nature and unparalleled skills made her a target for suspicion and envy. Some believed her remedies were unnatural, that she dabbled in forbidden practices. The truth was far more sinister. Amelia had stumbled upon a secret she was never meant to know, a smuggling operation that used the crypts of Ravenwood Cemetery as their base. Late one night, while foraging for rare herbs near the cemetery, she had seen shadowy figures moving heavy crates into an open tomb. Curiosity led her to follow them, and what she found changed everything. The crypts were being used to store stolen goods, gold, weapons, and illicit substances. Amelia, a woman of integrity, couldn't turn a blind eye. She confronted the men involved, warning them to leave Ravenwood or face exposure. They laughed at first, dismissing her as a harmless woman with a dog. But Amelia's resolve shook them. They realized too late that she wasn't bluffing. One cold autumn evening, Amelia and Blackthorn returned from the woods. A sense of unease hung in the air, so thick it felt suffocating. Blackthorn's ears perked, his body tense. He growled low as they approached their home, but Amelia, believing it to be nothing more than a fox or stray animal, reassured him with a soft pat. She never saw the shadows emerge from the trees. The men, faces obscured by scarves, moved swiftly. Amelia fought back, her screams piercing the night, but they silenced her before anyone could come to her aid. Blackthorn, still a young dog, was no match for their brutality. He was knocked unconscious, left to wake hours later beside the lifeless body of his beloved owner. The townsfolk found Amelia the next morning. The men who had killed her had made it look like an accident, a fall from the rocky path leading to her home. The whispers of foul play began almost immediately, but no evidence could tie anyone to the crime. Only Blackthorn knew the truth, and his golden eyes carried the weight of it. From that day forward, Blackthorn refused to leave Amelia's side. He followed her casket to the cemetery, his head low and his steps heavy. When the last shovelful of dirt was placed over her grave, Blackthorn sat down, his gaze fixed on the freshly turned earth. Days passed, and Blackthorn remained. Attempts to coax him away failed. He wouldn't eat the food left for him unless it was placed directly on Amelia's grave. He wouldn't drink unless it was from the rainwater that pooled near the headstone. He was waiting, watching, and remembering. The townsfolk began to see Blackthorn differently. To some, he was a reminder of Amelia's tragic death, a ghostly presence that haunted the cemetery. To others, he was a beacon of hope, a living testament to loyalty that defied the natural order. Legends about Blackthorn grew over time. Children spun tales about the dog being a spirit, bound to protect Amelia's grave until justice was served. Some claimed to see his eyes glow in the darkness, watching anyone who dared step too close to the grave. Others said his bark carried a message, a warning that only the guilty could understand. Despite the eerie stories, Blackthorn remained silent. His growls and barks were reserved for those he deemed threats, but most of the time, he sat quietly, staring into the distance as if waiting for something, or someone. Josiah, the drifter who frequented the cemetery, became one of Blackthorn's few companions. The man had seen more of life's shadows than most, and he recognized the weight the dog carried. "He's waiting for the truth," Josiah would mutter to anyone curious enough to ask about Blackthorn's vigil. "And when it comes, it won't be pretty." Josiah hinted that he knew more about Amelia's death than he let on, but fear kept him silent. Blackthorn, however, seemed to trust him, often lying beside the man as he smoked his cigarettes and muttered to himself. The relationship between Josiah and Blackthorn became part of the cemetery's lore. Some believed Josiah was a ghost himself, cursed to wander the cemetery with the dog. Others thought he was the last link to whatever truth Blackthorn guarded so fiercely. As the years passed, Blackthorn grew older, his fur speckled with gray, but his determination never wavered. The cemetery became his domain, and his presence gave it a purpose beyond housing the dead. It became a place of questions, of secrets, and of the unseen forces that bind the living and the lost. Little did the townsfolk know that Blackthorn's vigil wasn't just about mourning his owner. He was waiting for the moment when justice could finally be served. The legend of Blackthorn wasn't just a story of loyalty, it was a story of patience, of resilience, and of a truth too powerful to stay buried forever. It was a night like any other in Ravenwood Cemetery, the kind where the mist clung low to the ground, and the silence was so deep it felt alive. The townsfolk, long accustomed to Blackthorn's quiet presence, had stopped noticing the faint silhouette of the dog standing guard over Amelia's grave. But on this particular night, Blackthorn's restless pacing caught the attention of Josiah, who had taken up his usual spot on a mossy bench not far from the grave. Josiah noticed something strange. The dog's behavior was different. Blackthorn's ears were pinned back, his tail stiff, and his golden eyes darted toward the entrance of the cemetery. The drifter muttered to himself, pulling his jacket tighter as he followed the dog's gaze. There, at the edge of the cemetery, he saw the faint glow of headlights. A van, its engine barely audible, crept through the mist like a ghost. The van's occupants were no ordinary visitors. Two shadowy figures emerged, moving with purpose as they dragged a heavy, writhing bag from the back of the vehicle. Blackthorn growled low, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. Josiah froze, watching from the shadows as the men moved closer to the old crypts, their breaths visible in the chilly air. Blackthorn sprang into action. The dog's powerful bark echoed across the cemetery, shattering the eerie silence. The men, startled, turned their flashlights toward the sound, their beams cutting through the fog to reveal Blackthorn's form. "It's just a dog," one muttered, but his voice betrayed his unease. "Not just a dog," Josiah whispered to himself. Blackthorn charged toward the men, his body a blur of black fur and unwavering determination. The first man barely had time to react before Blackthorn sank his teeth into his arm, the flashlight clattering to the ground. The second man fumbled with a knife, slashing wildly as Blackthorn shifted his attack, relentless despite the growing injuries he sustained. Josiah, emboldened by the chaos, crept closer, his heart pounding. He saw the bag the men had been carrying. Its contents were unmistakably human. It writhed again, and Josiah realized with horror that whoever was inside was still alive. The commotion had not gone unnoticed. Nearby residents, awakened by the barking and muffled shouts, rushed to the cemetery armed with flashlights and improvised weapons. The men, now cornered, abandoned their struggle and tried to flee, but Blackthorn was relentless. By the time the townsfolk arrived, the scene was chaos. One man lay on the ground, his arm bloodied and useless. The other was pinned against the crypt's entrance, his face pale with fear as Blackthorn growled inches from his throat. Josiah shouted, "Help the bag!" 2 villagers rushed to untie it, revealing a woman, bound and gagged but very much alive. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted around before locking on Blackthorn, who stood protectively over her. The woman introduced herself as Clara Hart, a journalist investigating a decades-old smuggling ring. She had been gathering evidence about their operations in Ravenwood and had discovered a chilling connection to Amelia Draycott's death. Clara explained that she had found documents linking the smuggling network to the crypts, the same ones Amelia had stumbled upon years ago. The men, aware of Clara's investigation, had planned to silence her just as they had silenced Amelia. "If it weren't for this dog," Clara said, her voice trembling, "I'd be dead." The police arrived soon after, arresting the men and securing the evidence Clara had managed to collect. Under questioning, the men confessed not only to their plot against Clara, but also to their involvement in Amelia's death. Their confession finally brought closure to a mystery that had haunted the town for years. The townsfolk, who had once whispered about Amelia's grave in hushed tones, now stood in awe of Blackthorn. The dog, battered but alive, had become a hero, not just for Clara, but for Amelia and the entire town. Though victorious, Blackthorn was gravely injured. His once pristine black coat was matted with blood, and his movements were slow and pained. Clara, deeply moved by the dog's bravery, insisted on taking him to a veterinarian. The townsfolk gathered to help, carrying the dog gently to her car, their respect for him palpable in their careful handling. "He saved me," Clara said softly as she stroked Blackthorn's head. "The least I can do is save him." In the days that followed, the story of Blackthorn's heroics spread throughout Ravenwood. The cemetery, once a place of fear and superstition, became a symbol of courage and loyalty. People began visiting Amelia's grave not out of fear but to leave flowers, paying their respects to the woman who had risked everything for the truth. Josiah, the man who had always seemed like an outsider, was suddenly seen in a new light. He shared what he knew about Amelia's final days, filling in the gaps of her story with details only he had been privy to. The town listened, finally understanding the weight of the loss they had carried for so long. As Blackthorn recovered under Clara's care, the bond between them deepened. She adopted him, vowing to honor Amelia's memory by continuing her fight for justice. Blackthorn, though no longer the sentinel of Ravenwood Cemetery, remained a symbol of unwavering loyalty and bravery. A new gravestone was placed next to Amelia's, engraved with words chosen by Clara. "Loyalty outlives even death." Her truth brought justice, her love brought a guardian. The events of that fateful night had sent ripples through Ravenwood, shaking the small town from its slumber of complacency. For years, whispers of Amelia Draycott's death had lingered like a haunting melody, but now, those whispers had turned into something louder, calls for justice, understanding, and redemption. The 2 men apprehended in the cemetery were swiftly taken into custody. Under pressure, and with the overwhelming evidence provided by Clara Hart's investigation, they began to talk. Their confessions revealed the dark underbelly of Ravenwood, a network of criminals who had used the crypts of the cemetery as a hideout for smuggling and other illicit activities. When Amelia had uncovered their operation, they had panicked. The men admitted they had been sent to silence her, disguising her murder as an accident. Their words confirmed what the townsfolk had long suspected but had been too afraid to confront. Amelia's death was no accident, and the bravery she had shown in facing the criminals was now undeniable. The men's statements also brought to light an intricate chain of corruption that extended beyond Ravenwood. Their crimes were linked to a larger organization, one that Clara's reporting had been on the verge of exposing. The arrests marked the beginning of a reckoning, not just for Ravenwood but for the shadowy network that had operated in the dark for far too long. Clara became a central figure in the unraveling of the truth. Her determination to continue Amelia's fight earned her the admiration of the townsfolk, who saw her as a beacon of hope. Her articles, published in national newspapers, brought attention to the smuggling ring and shed light on the story of Amelia Draycott and Blackthorn. The public's response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, some offering support and others sharing similar stories of corruption and bravery. Clara's work inspired a movement, one that extended beyond Ravenwood, calling for accountability and justice for those who had been silenced. While Clara fought for justice, Blackthorn was on his own journey of healing. His injuries had been severe, but his spirit remained unbroken. With Clara's care, he slowly regained his strength. The townsfolk who had once viewed him as a ghostly figure now saw him as a hero, and they rallied around him. Blackthorn's presence at public events became a symbol of loyalty and courage. Schools invited Clara and Blackthorn to share their story, teaching children about the importance of standing up for what's right, even in the face of danger. The dog, once feared and misunderstood, now brought hope wherever he went. The town of Ravenwood itself underwent a transformation. The cemetery, which had once been shrouded in fear and superstition, became a place of reflection and respect. Amelia's grave, adorned with fresh flowers, became a gathering point for those seeking solace and inspiration. The townsfolk, inspired by the events, began to take a more active role in their community. They worked to address the lingering shadows of corruption, ensuring that the lessons of Amelia's story were not forgotten. The changes were slow but meaningful, a testament to the impact of one woman's courage and one dog's unwavering loyalty. In honor of Amelia Draycott and her sacrifice, a new gravestone was commissioned. It was larger than the original, crafted from polished granite and engraved with the epitaph chosen by Clara. Loyalty outlives even death. Her truth brought justice, her love brought a guardian. Blackthorn, though no longer keeping a constant vigil at Amelia's grave, often returned with Clara. On those visits, he would sit quietly by the gravestone, his golden eyes soft with something that could only be described as peace. For Clara, adopting Blackthorn was more than an act of gratitude. It was a promise to continue Amelia's legacy. She used her platform as a journalist to champion causes that aligned with Amelia's values, from environmental conservation to advocating for justice in forgotten communities. Clara's articles often featured Blackthorn, who had become a symbol of resilience and loyalty. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, their shared purpose creating a sense of family neither had experienced before. As time passed, the story of Amelia and Blackthorn became a legend in Ravenwood. Children grew up hearing the tale, their imaginations captivated by the bravery of the healer and her loyal dog. The town embraced its history, using it as a foundation for a brighter future. Ravenwood Cemetery, once a place of dread, became a protected historic site. Tours were organized, with guides recounting the story of Amelia Draycott, Blackthorn, and the night that changed everything. Visitors left inspired, many vowing to carry the lessons of loyalty and courage into their own lives. Years later, Clara and Blackthorn returned to the cemetery for what would be their final visit together. The dog, now older and moving slower, walked steadily to Amelia's grave. Clara knelt beside him, running her hand through his graying fur as she read the inscription aloud. Loyalty outlives even death. Her truth brought justice, her love brought a guardian. Blackthorn's tail wagged gently, and for a moment, it was as if he understood every word. Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We kept her promise." As they left the cemetery, the mist began to lift, revealing a sky streaked with the warm hues of dawn. It was a new day for Ravenwood, and for Clara and